Oh yeah, Julia is, and Elizaveta, and then, but I thought Liz was too, but she's not here. She's not listed as meeting us there, but I thought Liz was meeting us there.
She is. I think the other people just put that they were meeting there, but I'll put that on the document just to.
Okay.
Um, should I forward the people who are meeting us there the info about parking?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess maybe I'll just email them my cell phone number. You gave Liz yours, didn't you, John?
No, I don't think so. Oh, yeah, I did. That's right.
Maybe I'll just do that even though I'm not supposed to, because or I'll just tell them we're going to be up at the lobby at 7 o'clock, and they can find us there.
Right.
Um, yeah, their parking will be
Tachi, how are
validated
you?
at either the east or the west garage. We're probably going to end up parking in the east garage just because it has a higher clearance level, so we know our vans will fit, but they can park in either. Um, and then they just
Okay.
have to get it validated. I think it's like 20, it's 20 something if it's validated.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hey,
Hello. We're gonna have a flood of people show up at between 4 and 4:03 here, so
okay.
me.
Sorry, sorry I was a little late. It's been a while since I've been on campus, so I had to re-register my computer.
Oh, sure.
Then I had to download WebEx and all this stuff. you know.
No problem.
Mine was printing, like I was able to print from my computer after the help desk came and added the printers last week. And today, there are all the printers. I can't get any of them to respond. They're coming back at 5:15. Like, really? Like, what? Like,
Yep.
oh well.
So is there a way I can share my screen?
Yeah, it should be right on the button, screen with an up arrow in it. You should be able to do it.
Okay, hold on. I think I have to allow the
He did something wrong.
Uh-oh.
So let me.
That seems to have gone poorly.
okay.
You having trouble sharing the screen, Talk to Touch, or you got it?
It looked like I had to hop out and change a setting, and it forced me to restart. But I
Okay.
should be able to do it now. Tell me if you see this.
Yes.
Great. All right. We won't start. I won't put this up right away. Let me close it out, and then once you've once you're ready, I'll do it.
I always like when we get to see people's like the other recommended videos.
Oh no.
Well, mine were very weird because I did this like thing at Harper where that you got a personal trainer for like free that people that were in the personal training program. And then during the pandemic, it got shut down. So our personal trainers were like gave us virtual workouts, but it was basically like, hey, go follow this person on YouTube. So then whenever I show my YouTube, it's always like, oh, like 5 videos on the right that are like roided out dudes. So
I have a pretty embarrassing story about that, but I don't think I want to share it with all the students, even though it happened in class. And I was calling up a YouTube video, and somebody pointed out one of my recommended videos that was
oh my.
Well, you made me self-conscious, but I think my videos check out. My recommendations aren't too embarrassing.
I mean, most of mine were like scenes from Shakespeare plays, but
right. We are weirdly light today. It is also the heart of the aftermath of midterms, so it may be that we just are going to be a little light today, which is okay because last week we were a little light too, and I think I joked with you all that you had additional proportionate burdens of having to participate, and so that will be true this week as well, that like you have to carry 14% of the conversation instead of only 6.5% of the conversation. But we will go ahead and get started. Before we turn it over to Dr. Tachi, Dr. Charles Tachi is a professor of education at the Loyola University Chicago School of Education. But before we turn it over to him, he's also my friend. So if you hear me say Charlie a bunch, it's because I know him. Any other announcements? The obvious one is that tomorrow is the big day for Shakespeare. So if you're coming, please don't forget that.
any questions about Shakespeare? I meant that about like the trip, like not
Right.
the fellow or yeah.
Who's the real Shakespeare?
That's right. So just remember, it's in front of the Performing Arts Center, which is
Shakespeare.
obvious.
We're Shakespeare.
3:00 in the afternoon. There is a you would have seen the announcement. There is a virtual open house for Northern Illinois' honors program at sort of while we're driving to the Shakespeare Theater. So if you're not coming, you might want to check that out if you think you might go to Northern. Ananth went from Harper to Northern and now is back again taking a few classes. But it's always sort of a nice path for people if you think like, yeah, I might want to go to Northern. We have these honors program to honors program agreements, and we'd encourage you to take advantage. So if you're not going to Shakespeare, you might want to check out the open house. And if you are, I guess conceivably you could throw on your headphones and put on your cell data and participate while you're in the van. I couldn't because I'll be driving, as will Professor Tomasian, but the rest of you can. Any other announcements?
Safa?
You guys know this thing, but I'll remind you anyway that the college project has started filming our web series. If you guys like social media or videos or Harper at all, come and join us and you can talk to administrators and faculty and interview them, and we're having a lot of fun with it. It's called, oh, we have a name now. Oh my gosh, I'll do the reveal for the name. It's going to be called Hawk Talk. Me and Tamasia thinks it's amazing. If you guys think it's horrible, please join and let us know. So
It like came out of my mouth and like we're both nerdy enough that at the same time we were like, I like it. So talk, unless other people can't bear it.
But you have to join.
That's right. We don't care what you think unless you join us Mondays at 3:30.
And
I mean, we do care what you think, though.
the only other thing I'll mention is that you're going to see this announcement pop up on Friday. We deliberately left it off until we were done, with the Shakespeare trip. So, but Friday, you're going to see that our next wave of busyness is going to be leading up to Thanksgiving. So we'll have next week, the in-person meeting will be actually a workshop about finding a good transfer match. So I'll be leading that, and the people from Elmhurst and Lake Forest will be here too. And then our next virtual meeting is the 17th. That's our last meeting before Thanksgiving. And so Professor Matthews will be in, and we're going to talk about the rational versus the irrational, psychologist versus the philosopher. But the real thing I wanted to remind people of is actually there's going to be a whole bunch of opportunities right in that weekend. So the 19th, we're going to tie-dye masks that will then be donated to a local school. The 20th, we go back to the Forest Preserve, so dress warmly. And the 22nd is Monday, and that'll be helping out with a food pantry in Rolling Meadows. And we do not meet Wednesday the 24th because it is Thanksgiving break. So you'll see all those details pop up, or at least the basic announcement on Friday.
And remember to get going on the Phi Theta Kappa scholarships. They're due December 1st, and you'll need a letter too. So get going on that. If you're eligible for Jack and Cook, you probably want to make an appointment with me relatively soon.
Okay. All right, then. With that, we will turn it over to Dr. Charles Tachi from Loyola University Chicago. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Garcia. Thanks, Dr. Tomasian. It's great to see you both again. And it's fun to be back here. And thanks very much for everyone for coming this afternoon and spending some time with us. So as Dr. Garcia mentioned before, I'm professor of education here at Loyola. And right now is a particularly interesting time to be involved in the field of education, especially today. As you might have seen all over the news, not only for the past few months, but really intensely yesterday, there's a lot of talk about critical race theory, about social emotional learning, about mask mandates, and now soon a lot more talk will be about vaccine mandates for kids in schools. And in yesterday, it was particularly intense, some of that discussion, because we were seeing political pundits say things like, well, the Virginia governorship was won by a Republican because they were able to fire up their base about critical race theory and this and that. And so whenever education becomes a top line story, it really sort of pricks up my ears because it's like, with attention comes a lot more scrutiny and comes a lot more debate. And so I'm expecting that here the next few, maybe next couple of years. We'll see. In any case, I want to talk today about the purposes of our public school system, because I think this cuts to the heart to what a lot of the current debate is about. We're hearing people talk about critical race theory, whether or not it is taught in our K-12 schools. We're hearing people talk about social emotional learning, and whether or not that should be taught in our schools. And I don't know. Well, there are lots of things that we could talk about with each of those issues and with mask mandates and vaccines, but I want to generalize it and talk more broadly about the purpose of our public schools, what they should do, because in a lot of ways, all of these different arguments are cut to the heart of what our schools are supposed to do and what we want them to do in our communities. So I'll pause here and just ask you at the outset. You can reply in the chat or come off mute and respond. At the outset, as we start on this conversation today, what right now do you think are the purposes of our public school system?
And Emily, I joked with Dr. Tachi, and I shared the joke with you that we're making this about K through 12, since you've already had to deal with the question at the college level a little bit. We hope you have thoughts about this, having gone through the K-12 system, or at least some of you.
I would say the purpose of public health schools is to educate and prepare young students to be successful after they graduate, and provide education, and also I think take care of their well-being too, because it's public school. So I think most people are supposed to be allowed to go into it, and so it's an opportunity for all students of anywhere you are. And so I think it's a fair shot for every student in the community to gain and access education fairly.
And then we got a couple in the chat here, a way to provide baseline education for children until they are adults. Teach discipline. Oh, what happened there? Discipline, hard work, and how to think critically.
And another one,
And
give a child an opportunity to get an education.
And then one more, prepare them to be functioning members of society. These are all deliciously vague, so I'm super excited now.
Mm-hmm. a fundamental education for kids. Purpose of public schools are to teach basic skills such as reading and writing, along with information about the world. Okay. It's also about sharing information too, considering the world revolves around societies that use pre-existing foundations. Okay. This is fascinating. So, well, to just pause for one more minute and follow up on these, why do you think you all have different answers? There's certainly overlap, but why do you have different answers?
Well, I think kind of going off of what Marion just said about this public education kind of be accessible to all these communities, it's like every community is different. So that means that the access that you have to the teachers who probably also went to similar schools also have similar ideas, and they're all kind of, you know, under this umbrella of this one community. Even if they're coming from far away, you're still coming to, you know, the walls of the school. And so I think even if we're talking about private schools, there's still that same kind of funneling of information, types of people. Sometimes demographics of people are very, you know, there's not a wide demographic. So I think it's just, you know, based because it's public, I think we automatically think like it's open to so many people, but it's still, you know, a tight-knit community at the end of the day.
Interesting, thanks. And then in the chat, different backgrounds, different experiences, priorities on how to train people due to priorities and beliefs about what life itself encompasses will differ between people. We have different answers because we all took something different from our schools, and schools don't teach us that way, even though it's the same curriculum. Okay, these are interesting answers that start to get to one of the core tensions here, which is public schools are government institutions, right? They're public, they serve the entirety of the public, but they also serve specific communities. And in there's a real tension. How do you serve individual communities, the folks that live around within the boundaries of a single public school district, but then also serve everyone in your state well with one coherent system of education. So there's real tensions in there. And the really tense question in there is about who gets to decide that, who gets to make those choices, and how do you make the right choices around that. So I want to pause here. There's a couple more in the chat. One more in the chat. Public school is supposed to really follow the lines of the hosting nation's priorities. You know? So we're going to pause here for a moment and think about what those priorities are and how we get those priorities. So I'm going to share a short video here. And I'll set it up before I play it. So this video was uploaded just a couple months ago. It's a public school board meeting from Washington County, Wisconsin, which is just northwest of Milwaukee. It's like suburban Milwaukee. And these are parents addressing the board about critical race theory and social emotional learning. So I want to listen to them for a few minutes, hear what they have to say. And afterwards, we'll debrief what they were saying, what kind of things they were asking for. But for a few minutes here, let's just listen to what they have to say.
Thompson, I'm a parent of 2 in the district. My address has been provided. Tonight, I will speak to you about Castle SEL, which, when I looked at all the teacher and student lessons at the school district offices, is listed on almost all the lessons. It's called Castle Core Competencies. I looked up the West Bend School District, who the West Bend School District has made for SEL lessons. What I found is that all of the companies we made are also using Castle Core Competencies to teach SEL. Second step, Committee for Children, Aperture Education, and Purpose Prep all use Castle. Well, why does that matter? Well, let me walk you through the problems with basing the entirety of our SEL curriculum on Castle. The president and CEO of Castle, Karen Meany, announced that Castle has revised its definition and framework for SEL to highlight the value of SEL as a weapon for social justice. In a 2020 webinar, Karen Meany also was quoted as saying, SEL should be used to favor certain students over others, primarily because of their race, end quote. Under SEL competencies on the Castle website, it states SEL competencies can be a leverage to develop justice-oriented global citizens. It goes on to add that programs will involve getting children to, quote, assess power dynamics and confront issues of race and class across different settings, end quote. On CASTLE's website, it states under CASTLE's statement standard framework that CASTLE is, quote, aimed at redistributing power to promote social justice. It also states that under their section of cultural analysis, quote, make explicit issues such as power, privilege, prejudice, discrimination, and social justice a part of SEL, end quote. With all the racially charged fights happening in the high school lately, do you really think it's going to get better teaching these things? The answer is no. It's only going to get worse. Kids at these ages are not emotionally mature enough to handle adult issues. The high school fights have proven me right. Just a week ago, I went to the district and read the teacher-student lessons for SEL. Do you know what I found? In the 7th grade lesson, Unit 2, the teacher is to ask the students in multiple lessons to rate something. We would normally use a 1 to 5 range, but not in these lessons. They are asked to put a fist in the air if they don't agree with the statements the teacher reads. A fist. Do you know who also puts a fist in the air? Marxists, communists, and BLM. I have pictures here showing proof. And do you support this? Because by allowing SEL to be taught in Badger, what you're telling West Bend parents is that you not only approve this, but you support it. Part of the second step copyright states that you are not allowed to edit or change anything in the lessons. I have a copy of that for everyone as well. So everything in the SEL lessons they have to stay, they are not able to be removed or altered. No crossing out our website we don't want taught, no telling teachers that we can't say something. It will all get taught. I do not feel safe with my children going to school anymore unless the board takes decisive action to remove SEL in an emergency meeting. If you have the power to make parents and kids feel safe again in our schools, and when something bad happens because of SEL teaching, like the BML fights today, whose fault will it be? It won't be mine.
Good evening, and thank you for giving me time to speak to you this evening. My name is Chris Thompson. I am a resident of West Bend. My address has been given, and I have 2 children in the school district. I attended this board meeting last week, and I watched the rest online. I heard numerous concerned parents and citizens of the district share their findings about SEL and asked the board to remove it from their curriculum. These are parents who sacrifice countless hours of their lives outside of their jobs and family responsibilities to bring these facts to your attention. They sat in the district offices poring over curriculum. They sat in on curriculum meetings and held numerous conversations with district officials to lay out their concerns. I listened as a member of the board dismissed these concerns last week, stating that, quote, there wasn't an ounce of CRT as you hear about it on Fox News, end quote, as if it were just that simple. Well, I don't watch Fox News, but I can tell you that after doing just a small bit of cursory research on the castle.org site, it was clear to me that the underpinnings of this curriculum are rooted in the same poisonous ideological precepts as Black Lives Matter, a self-proclaimed Marxist organization. Buzzwords such as social justice, equity, and privilege are littered throughout the source documents, research articles, and reference resources that make up the foundations of this curriculum. This is a divisive ideology. Far from being settled science, and it is far too volatile for our young people to be able to process in a constructive way without direct parental guidance, and I can prove it. Just look at the fruits of what this has produced over the last 2 successive school days. On Friday last week, the high school was placed on a hold. That's a lockdown without threat of danger, due to a student who decided to incite a Black Lives Matter protest in the middle of the school day. Just this morning, more West Bend police officers had to respond to the high school again to break up a fight stemming from a student who objected to the protest last week. I know this because my child knows this. And because videos and conversations and commentary have been circulating all over social media since last week. You say that these programs teach values such as empathy, compassion, but I'm here tonight to inform you that you do not have the right or the authority to be teaching any kind of values to my children. That's not your role. It's mine as a parent, and I take it very seriously. Moreover, the decisions that have led to this curriculum being used in our district today leave me with serious concerns about your ability to ensure my children's safety during the school day. Last week, one board member commented that we should have this much parent turnout for every meeting. Well, maybe she has a point, but I would submit to you that at least in part, attendance at these meetings has been right because you have been entrusted by your constituents to watch and protect this district from harmful policies being put into place. I'm here to tell you that this trust has now been broken. If this board does not get serious and seek to make decisive action right now with regards to racially charged ideology existing within our curriculum today, I fear these problems will continue to escalate. This is not the reputation we want for our community. Please hear our requests and make the responsible decision to have this removed from our curriculum. Thank you for your time.
Good call again. Good call.
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot on their plates. Like Harper, an econ major who piles on the pressure. Grammarly can help her stress less.
Who's that? Who's doing
Interest
that?
would be great.
All right.
Oh, that was him. Okay.
That was me. That was. All right. Apologies for that. Okay. A good call on the captions again. Thanks very much for that. Okay. So I wanna take these parents seriously, as they were very seriously thinking about how they want to address their local school board about what sounds like some very intense incidents that had been happening at their high school. But what stuck out to you all? You can respond. You can come off mute, or you can respond in the chat. What stuck out to you about what these parents were saying? What did you observe? What questions do you have? What seemed most interesting or controversial?
Okay. Diego says nothing really. Jacob?
So from what I saw, it seems like the parents were arguing that in some ways they should be responsible for the education of their children, and that the school is there to deliver a different type of education, but only to a certain extent.
Okay. Anyone else? And Dr. Tachi, oh, go ahead, Safa.
I was kind of hearing the way that they were expressing themselves as, you know, what they want the solution to be was to not have children be exposed to what actually exists out there, and instead have them understand what's going on in the world and about their peers' experiences through a very filtered lens that was catered to what the parents wanted, and not necessarily what the children or friends of those children would prefer for, you know, everybody else to have knowledge about. It seemed like their solution was kind of putting their kids in a bubble where they only received information that was very filtered.
And Aponchu in the chat sort of a little bit kind of echoed that, and just mentioned that I think it was the first speaker's comment that the kids weren't developed enough to think critically about it. And I am sort of myself, I find that to be that's an interesting critique to me. So like my wife's a librarian. We talk to our daughter sometimes about banned books, and there's books that have been banned over the years or attempted to be banned because they're like, this is too, like, it's sorcery and we don't want Harry Potter because it's anti-Christian. But there's others that are like, there's a rape scene in this book and I don't think it's appropriate. Like, so there's a pretty sophisticated critique here, right? Which is like, my child is not emotionally ready to be exposed to this kind of thing, which does seem to be like something that deserves some thought.
Well, then conversely, the second father steps up and says that the school has no authority to teach values to my children like empathy, right? So
That's our job, he says.
Yeah, that's the family's job, and that he takes it very seriously. So even within them, even within the two speakers, there's this debate, right? Like, what's the right thing to teach here? Where are the lines? What are the lines, and how do you find out what those are? Especially if schools are supposed to serve their community, and the community disagrees about what's supposed to be taught or what's appropriate to be taught. How do we wrestle with this? In the chat, it was interesting that someone said it was not their job to teach values or empathy. It's the parents' job, but many kids in public schools may not receive that from their parents or guardians, or the parents may not be very present in their lives.
And what they, not just like what they propose to be the solution, but also what they propose to be the issue here. A lot of them found the issue being with certain kids speaking their minds. They found it they attributed violence to being the rhetoric being taught at school. So it sounds like they kind of made their assumptions about what the problem was and also what the solution is. And I think that, they attribute a lot of that to the school because the school is at the root of how they're getting educated because, obviously they're not the ones who taught their kids that. So they just go to the next place, which would be school. So I think it'd also be interesting to note that what they see as the problem and what they see as the solution is kind of also very different.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that it was interesting that they kept pointing to these fights that happened at the school and like without any sort of, there wasn't really any sort of chicken and egg analysis, right? So I think that they were just like, well, this curriculum caused people to have these thoughts and that's what created the fight, as opposed to like maybe the curriculum is reflecting, systems in society that might create tension and could even result in fights, right? Like, but they were just like, see, you want proof that this curriculum is dangerous? Look at what's happening in our schools, right? Like, so I thought that was sort of interesting that sort of, there was a direct correlation between the curriculum and it sounds like, and I couldn't tell if there were actual fights or if they were upset about a protest. It wasn't even clear to me that there was violence.
But it seemed like, if I understood it right, what seemed interesting is like the parents' example was, here are the two problems. There was a protest, and someone pissed off about the protest seemed to have started a fight.
Right, I think that.
So, but presumably the global critique seemed to be that it was divisive and like for that reason bad, which I thought was interesting.
But the divisiveness, it's interesting that the divisiveness like seems to have come about as the response to the protest, right? So like if that's right, then there was the protest and then somebody was like, no, I'm mad about this, and then a fight started. So is it like, is it parents teaching the kids like be upset if you see this kind of a protest, or is it the curriculum that's like you guys hate each other, right? Like, yeah, it was sort of an interesting piece of evidence they held up for like the reason that this is a problem.
Yeah, and it's curious to me because I grew up in an all-white small town, and my high school had plenty of fights, like and so that there were fights. I don't know what exactly that points to. I think fights are characteristic of American high school. I don't know that I've ever been in American high school where there haven't been fights, but that's sort of a related issue here. There's several great comments here in the chat. Diego is asking us to keep in mind the ideology versus authority arguments that are at play, and they're definitely interwoven, and we should keep those lines straight. So thank you for that. And then from Liz, my teacher friends complain that parents expect them to teach their kids values. At the end of the day, if the values are not taught at home, they definitely don't run in public schools. So I want to use this. I want to take right now and pivot back and ask you about your own educations. And so if you will, take a moment here and respond in the chat, please, with just briefly where you went to high school or secondary school and what you think are the one or two most important things you learned there. So take a moment in the chat, where you went to high school / secondary school, and what are the most important things you learned? We don't need to know when. I don't want to expose Dr. Garcia like that. But we'll just where and the
We're
one or
doing
two
it
most
too?
important things.
Sure,
You can.
sure. And I'm gonna implement the 30 seconds and then hit enter rule that we've done. So damn it, Marion. So just nobody enters until 30 seconds, then you can all hit enter so that people don't feel drowned out by the fast typists. So
The
besides, your
most
answer was
important thing
incomplete,
we learned.
Marion. So where did you go and the one or two most important things you learned? So
Oh my
no one hit
God.
enter until 30 seconds. Dun-dun-dun. Sure there's a timer in WebEx, but
It's a very, very loaded question.
Loaded questions are the only ones that go boom.
I mean, I'm not going to put like use of the comma.
We're doing our work quietly. Okay, you may hit enter or keep typing if you need. What do we got? States, importance, and diversity. Perseverance. This is fascinating, by the way.
Mhm.
Time management and teamwork. Time management, teamwork.
I don't want to, before we delve into some of the responses, I just want to pick up on Diego's comment about homeschooling. It's not really going to, we're talking about public schools here, so it's a little bit different, but homeschooling is a huge topic about which there isn't a whole lot that's been written or researched. It's estimated that somewhere between 2 and 5% of American youth are homeschooled, but there aren't even clear numbers about the number of them. So the laws from state to state governing homeschooling vary greatly. Some don't require reporting back to the state at all. Some have very strict requirements about reporting to the state about curriculum and taking tests. And so there's great variation, and the estimates really vary about how many students are homeschooled in some capacity or not. So when you say the numbers, go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to say, and then of course there are people who go to private school and secular private schools and religious private schools. So that's all a little bit outside of this conversation, because a private school generally clearly defines what its mission is and says, like, this is why your kids go here, right? So yeah. What I love about your answers as Dr. Tachi's going through them is that none of them, not one of them, was about like, I learned the following set of facts, or I learned this following set of basic skills in English or math, which I think is right. Like, I'm glad that was true, but I thought it was interesting that your earlier answers were all like, it's to teach you basic skills.
By the way, folks, I was telling my one-on-one class the other day, I went to a suburban high school outside of Boston, and we had students, minority students bust in from Mattapan and from Roxbury to go to school with us. So we were, starting in kindergarten. So I was probably the very first generation that went to a school that was somewhat diverse because of busing.
Yeah, and those programs have almost all completely ended now.
And it's weird, I think that for the most part, I mean, there were things about it, and like, for example, at my 10-year reunion, I was talking with one of the students who'd been bussed in, and we were both in grad school, and we're like, why weren't we friends in high school? And I think it was true that like there was a split in who hung out with whom to a certain extent. On the other hand, I was good friends with some students who bust in, and still, like, we're friends on Facebook now, and it's interesting. Like it is interesting to see how it panned out, like 30 years later, and who's still friends, and what we have in common from going to that school together. It's interesting, and there was, the last time I went to a reunion. There was an interesting mix of students there, and definitely it did seem like there were students who had bussed in who wanted to be at that reunion and felt loyal to our high school and who were there. And so, I mean, I think I mean, I know, like, it's weird. Like, now it seems like this archaic thing. I think that there were things about it that were really successful. Obviously, there were things that were not thought out, but I think the fact that they were our classmates from kindergarten, right? So it wasn't like they were recruited to play a sport or anything like that. They were with us from when we were like 5 or 6. So I don't know, like it's you know, that town is still not that diverse. And I think that the school is probably much less diverse than when I went. I think it was hard on the students in some ways because they had to get up earlier, they had to, you know, but I don't know, like it's interesting. It was interesting to listen to Kamala Harris talk about it. I'm like, I went to a school like that. And they don't really like I don't know. I mean, I think there was a benefit to all of us, even though it wasn't perfect.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. What I'd like you to do now is to just, I think you've all probably done this, but just take a quick look at everybody's responses and what commonalities you see, what patterns emerged to you, what
Sorry,
the common elements that folks had in their responses.
I didn't mean to jump the gun.
It's okay. No, no. That's where we're going.
I was just saying no 30-second rule, so you can raise your hand just like Jacob did whenever. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so one of the commonalities I saw was hard work. Personally, I think hard work is pretty important because if you don't work hard, especially on your assignments or outside of school when it comes to, uh, for example, sports, then you probably won't have much success.
Okay. Anyone else? Other things you noticed?
I'm a well-rounded person. A number of you had sort of thoughts kind of like that, to reach out, and I think that means, you know, try new things, but also get to know a lot of different kinds of people.
Do you all think of being well-rounded as a skill or as a value? I'm curious. Because you know, you hear a lot of parents and you guys talk about teaching skills, and maybe people feel differently about teaching kids values. And I'm not sure what category that belongs in. What do you all think?
Can someone expound on the skill response, either in the chat or off mute? Because my instinct was that it's a value. It's a value that would drive you to learn new skills or seek out new experiences.
Okay, so yeah, a couple people said skill. So Emily, go ahead, and then we'll get the people who said skill. Or you could put it in the chat while Emily. Well, no, listen, and then you can expound. What do you think, Emily?
I was gonna respond to your thing before I raised my hand before then, but I can wait to respond to that until everyone else answers the other question.
Well, it's okay. We can go back to that
Yeah,
original question, and then we'll come
Yep.
back to the skill versus value. So, the original question from Dr. Tachi was what? Just commonalities?
Yep, patterns, commonalities, things that emerge to you. Yeah.
So,
Well, I was answering your question about being well-rounded and a skill.
oh yeah,
I just said that it like the lines seem to be kind of blurring. I would say because for like getting into colleges, I feel like there's been a lot more emphasis on being well-rounded. So whether or not it's a value or it's something that like people feel they need to do in order to get into like a university or college, I think it's kind of hard to say if it's out of like necessity or if it's like something that people actually value.
that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Safa, you had said skill.
I think the fact, kind of like what Emily was saying, the fact that it changes over time and the way that people interact with it changes so much over time makes it a skill, because there's certain values like honesty or patience or being kind, where it's like those can kind of be these very steady values that it doesn't really matter where you are, you can apply those. But well-rounded, it's like time management skills, it's, you know, your skills with your relationships, and that's always changing. So to me, well-rounded is like, can I deal with everything that's going on right now in a way that doesn't make me want to blow my brains out? So it's like, when I was a kid, being well-rounded was like, can I listen to my parents for all of my chores I need to do in a day? And now it's like, can I do my homework and do my laundry and go to work and come home you know, so it's like it changes. So I feel like it's a skill because if I'm not working at it, if I'm not actively changing it and developing it, which you develop patience in that stuff too, but to an extent, a certain amount of patience will get you pretty far. But being well rounded is something you I think, more actively have to work towards than a value that's almost ingrained in you.
So do you mind if I say something, Dr. Tachi?
Oh.
I'm intrigued by this because I think it depends on what it occurs to me that actually well-roundedness, that was a great comment, Safa, is like a kind of an empty expression because it depends on what you're putting in there. So for myself, and I wonder if Dr. Tachi, you were feeling the same way too. Like I guess my instinct was think well-rounded was like to have a diversity of perspectives as opposed to what I'm sensing you guys are talking about. Like I have to have done cross country and be in student government and like take a bunch of AP classes and like that's well-rounded. Like balancing lots of different kinds of things I did, which that's interesting. Okay. So I don't know what I guess. Yeah. All right. Dr. Tachi, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think that was a really interesting explanation. So thanks for that, Safa. And I hear what Dr. Garcia is saying. I think part of this is generational. I think part of this is that that folks of your generation here, that the students in this group, have been expected to and have been expected to and been pushed into having a variety of events and a variety of extracurricular activities and a variety of academic experiences, which have had you balance those things. I definitely see this with my own children. I don't know about you, Dr. Tomasian and Dr. Garcia, but when I was growing up, I didn't really feel a lot of pressure to do anything in particular other than get good grades. So like your free time is like your free time. Do not bother your parents. You go to school.
A lot of different things, but I didn't do them to like. I wasn't a kid who was like, I have to do this to get into college. Like they were all things I wanted to do. Like I wanted to play the trumpet. I wanted to do gymnastics. I wanted to do a play. So I was that kid, and I didn't think of it as like checking off boxes. I was constantly sort of overloading myself because I love doing all that stuff and the paper, the newspaper and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't want to dwell on it too long, but I think I think there's something of a generational divide there, and I think part of it is the changing expectations that we've put on youth. And I think I've seen it really clearly, even as soon as my children started kindergarten, where when they entered kindergarten, they were expected to be able to read already, and certainly when I started kindergarten. The first thing we did was learn our letters, like what the letter A. And
we didn't know how to read. Like we did arts and crafts. Like that's right. We learned our alphabet in kindergarten.
Yeah. So I definitely think there's been a steady progression in what's expected of our youth and how much they're supposed to be involved in, how much they're supposed to tackle as part of their regular education. And Diego adds, the truth is that both skills are taught in schools. However, schools are also constantly reinforce values. Private ones, commonly religious, but public ones, still the majority, teach them as well. Values specifically are supposed to be shared amongst the nation, in our case, the U.S. Math, reading, writing. Yeah, thanks. So this anticipates my next question. Was for you to go back and look at the things that you all listed as the most important things you learned from school, and now I want you to categorize them. Were they for your personal good, or were they for the public good? Did the most important things you got from your high school or secondary education, were they primarily valuable for you as an individual, or were they primarily valuable for society at large? The question clear? Okay. Primarily. Yeah, it's
51%.
yeah, there's subjectivity there, and that's where we're headed with this. So, as the way you think about it, the things you got from your high school, secondary education, was it more about what was good and valuable for you, or more good for society? Well, maybe that was an odd twist of a question.
Oh, I didn't know if you guys thought I was putting you on the 30-second timer. You could
Okay.
answer whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? I mean, I struggle with this myself, but I saw a couple people wrote personal.
Both.
Both, personal, both. You could say both, Marianne. Okay. More personal, Antana says. So, Pancho, can I pick on you for a second?
Sure.
Hi, buddy. When you say personal, like, can you just tell me like the thing that you think about learning and why you think of that thing as like primarily about a personal benefit?
Sure. So the thing I mentioned about Hoffman Six High School was that I found the diversity there to be influential in my learning. And I think that is a little bit more on the personal level because I feel like everybody there doesn't really impact like I guess society as much, but it definitely helped to hear different perspectives on what might be thought of as a universally like accepted opinion in one place. There are so many like different opinions on any issue in high school for me, just because of how many people of different backgrounds there were. So that's why I feel like it was more personal for me.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
Here's my question. If we changed being able to appreciate diversity of opinion to being better at math, would you say that's more personal benefit, less personal benefit, or same?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Imagine. So what I was curious about is what was the benefit you were pointing to in terms of being personal? And you said like being able to appreciate a diversity of opinions, right? And I was just curious, like, imagine the thing that you took out of school was like, I'm glad I learned how to be really good at math. Would you take being good at math as this, like that is also a personal benefit, or would you say that's more of a personal benefit than appreciating diversity of opinion? Like, or do you see differences between those two things as opposed to whether they're personal or public benefits? I'm really asking you. Aponchu.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I were to get out of high school and say that I really got better at math thanks to school, I think that would be probably more personal, just because it's unique to me being better at math. But yeah, that's just what I think of it initially.
I mean to butt in, Dr. Tachi. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna probe again and ask if anybody else had any other thoughts in the chat here. The way I look at it right now is the skills you learn should help you grow as a person, and then hopefully translate to benefiting your community. Yeah, so let me just pick up on that because I think there's something really interesting about this argument. I want to go back to the speakers we watched a few minutes ago, and all of their comments were grounded in my child, right? Their comments were primarily focused on how the curriculum being taught, their experiences at school, were affecting their own children, and this way they were treating the educational experience in the public school as a personal good, right? That this is what I'm here to speak to the board about improving the school, making the school better, making the curriculum better, for the benefit of my child. That this is an institution that serves my child, that serves my family. It's a personal good. It's about preparing them. And then when I look back at some of the things you talked about, the purpose of schools at the top of this conversation, prepare students to be successful after graduation and their well-being, I think that's their personal, kind of a personal good. Provide a baseline education. I think that might balance sort of personal and public good. Give them discipline, hard work, think critically. Again, I think that's personal. But then there was the comment. I'm sorry, I didn't write down who said which one. I just wrote down the comments. The last one was become functioning members of society, which I think is a public good. That's the other side of this debate. Is that I think lots of families approach schools, especially middle and upper class families, approach schools as if they are there to provide a private good for their families. And in turn, providing a private good for every student will benefit society. That's the working theory. That if everybody gets values like discipline, hard work, and critical thinking, if everybody gets a baseline education, ultimately that will benefit society. Whereas the other line of thinking and the position that I think our educators take and our school administrators take and even our lawmakers often take is, well, how do we provide a system of schools that serves society generally, that serves the common good, the public good, and that those things are really in tension with one another. And again, I think we can see that in the comments made by the speakers, that especially that second speaker, teaching a value like empathy when you're attending a racially diverse high school would seem to be a public good. How do we live in a multicultural democracy? Having empathy across racial and ethnic differences is a real public good. It's something that we need for society generally. But the father there is claiming that this is a value that should be instilled privately in the family, that the school is not, that doesn't have the authority to reach into that arena. And so this balance between public goods and private goods is one of the real struggles in our school system. And it's hard for us to think through. It is a constant tension that's difficult for a lot of communities to think through about what benefits my child, what benefits the individual student, and what benefits all of us through schools. And I think our conversation in a lot of ways has mirrored both sides of that discussion.
So,
oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to ask you, Dr. Tachi. So, I'm curious. I'm asking you to just sort of speculate a little bit here, but one thing I struggle with is whether parents are being sincere when they say we don't want you to teach values because those are sort of public good type of things, or they just want you to teach values that they like, that like, and I'm sure there's some segment of each, that there are some parents who just think, just teach my kid English and math, and everything else should be like, you don't teach it. I think that's a little weird because like that would like, I don't actually think people believe that we should have like no social studies. We should like, second graders should not learn not to bully. Like, I feel like you guys, if you think back of K through 12 and not just high school, you'd probably think about like how much of your education was character formation, which seems to be public good oriented. And it seems like most of that we're okay with. So I'm kind of wondering what you all, I guess, but I'll start with you, Dr. Tachi, think about the claim that like schools should not teach values, and if that's just code for don't teach values that make me or my child uncomfortable.
I would say it's the latter. It's don't teach values that contradict or are different than the ones that I hope to instill in my child. So, for instance, like hard work tends to be a common one, right? That you learn through school, that schools focus on, because I think most parents would be horrified if they sent their kid to a school where like everybody got A's and there were no due dates and you didn't really have to turn in your work. Students might love it, but parents would probably be mortified. Like, what kind of school is this? I'm going to teach my kids how to like meet a deadline, how to manage their work, how to like organize themselves. And so, you know, a lot of this is implicit. I think the the struggle is when you disagree, when you individually disagree with what the school is teaching your student. Is it an issue of it transgresses my private values, my personal values, the things that we want my student to get, the personal good that my child will get from the school, or whether or not it is sort of, yeah, maybe I don't agree with it necessarily, but it is for the benefit of society writ large, right? Learning empathy and learning empathy in school. Yeah, it might be different than what I want to teach my kid at home, but yeah, that is a value that it does benefit society in general, and professional educators with years of experience in education have identified this as important, and our lawmakers have identified it as important. So maybe I should go along with it.
Is this thing working? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
I was having some connectivity issues too, so I don't know.
Let's see.
We can hear you,
here.
Diego.
Everyone can hear me now?
Yeah. Yep.
This is too long to type out. Forgive me if you hear noise in the background. It's really noisy. I just wanted to say that oftentimes schools do not teach debatable ideologies or values, such as, for example, religion. Most public schools not teach that because that's debatable. There are other ideologies out there, like when it's okay to use violence or not. Those kind of things usually aren't taught, like or especially like political stances. They aren't necessarily taught. I mean, they are taught in the sense that they are taught in a neutral sense of what they are sometimes, but they don't necessarily support one. And so it's important to keep in mind with any ideology, including the one discussed in the video, how debatable it is, which of course depends on a wide array of things: its execution, its authenticity, of course, and its evidence. How many people agree with it? Why? That sort of thing. So generally, when we teach values in school. We teach values in school. That is true, but we teach values that are agreed upon as a nation. Usually, if you don't, then you're usually in trouble. And that's when controversy arrives. So I just want to throw that out there. We usually do on shared values. So everyone's saying, "Oh, values are taught." Well, that's true, but I just wanted to highlight the distinction.
Thank you. As a historian, one of the things that's interesting to me is how those values evolve over time, how they change over time, how what is agreed upon changes over time, but also how it changes differently across the geography. What's agreed upon values in some communities are not the same as agreed upon values in other communities.
Which Don't they have to teach both sides of the Holocaust in Texas? What's the other side?
Well, the social studies scholar Diana Hess makes this really great argument where she writes about her own teaching experience, that when she started teaching in the late 70s, Japanese internment was largely taught in schools as a closed issue. That was, teachers taught that, yeah, Japanese internment was regrettable, but it was necessary for the United States to survive World War II. And that's kind of how I learned it too, about a decade after that. But then as Diana lays out, through the 80s and into the 90s, that the way it was taught changed. It became an open question. Often it was framed as a class debate, right? Like half the class argues that Japanese internment was wrong, the other class argues that it was necessary. And finally, in more recent years, kind of like from the late 90s on, most teachers now teach Japanese internment as a closed question, right? It was wrong. It should not have happened. It's now a closed question. And so that kind of the evolution of the values implied in there, and the evolution of the ways we teach these things, are really fascinating to me and important for us all to think about, because what we see as controversial today may be a closed question sometime very near in the future. The values that we think are controversial, the values that even we think are settled on today, that we all have broad agreement on, won't necessarily stay that way as we move forward.
Well, so, okay, Dr. Tachi, I want to ask you about this then, because one, I think more sophisticated, there's always one problem with the objection to critical race theory, which is that it's like no one knows what they're talking about when they're objecting to it. And it's, but setting that aside for a second, like one thing that's interested me when I hear students talking about the teaching of diversity appreciation, let's say, is that I think some say the problem with this is it's treating it like a closed issue, and we should treat it more like an open issue. And I'm curious about that, because it's like that internment camp example is such an interesting one, because you could really convince me either way about which is better, to treat it as an open issue or as a closed issue was obviously wrong. And like, I really don't know which one I feel better about, you know? And let me just be clear to everyone else, not because I think it's like I'm 50-50, but because I think the practice of treating it as an open issue might be educationally beneficial. So, yeah.
Well, I know we're past 5, so I don't want to take up any more time here. I think you all have other things you got to do.
Sorry.
No, but I really appreciate the conversation. I really appreciate the comments. They're really interesting. I've been thinking about these for a while. So yeah, I appreciate everyone's time this evening. I appreciate everybody's thoughts and contributions. I hope you enjoyed it too. Take good care and good luck with the rest of your semester. I know it's
Thank you, Dr. Tachi. Sorry for asking a question after it was already 5.
Dr. Tachi.
No, that's all right. I didn't want to answer it and lead this whole thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, we're really chewing into people's time. Plus, I got class at 5:30, so I gotta.
Oh, okay. I'll let you
Go
go.
talk to him later whenever I want. So, all right, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye, folks.
We'll see you back in person next week. Bye.